Hello and most welcome to Gyllene Freden in the old town of Stockholm. We are currently recording in the cellar. We're continuing with Jacques Derrida of an apocalyptic tone recently adopted by Jacques Derrida, adopted in philosophy. And we are currently at page 21. It's been a busy day, I have to add. We've been at it since 8 o'clock, more or less. And there is no pause for us. Still working here in this lovely cellar. We can have a little panorama without showing any people. Just here. So the bar I can show people. I've been speaking about the voice. And mentioning the voice, the language, it is the tone, the voice that speaks, the voice that's acting. And we said earlier that the D-tone voice, the voice without a tone, that is the tone that is able, assumedly, to communicate, to bring forth a message, to be able to tell, to say something. That happens immediately, without delay. It doesn't take any time, and it doesn't take any space. That is exactly the circle coming back to its own origin, and doing that immediately, without a time lapse, without transversing a distance in space. The immediacy, the sheer directedness is very special, and that is of course part of the detoned reality. I will continue. It's currently on the second paragraph, page 21. Is not the voice always that of the last man? The voice or language itself, the song or accent in language itself. Reuben closes his second version of Patmos, the poem bearing as its title the name of the apocalyptic island, that of John by invoking the poem of the German tongue. Heidegger often cites the first lines of this poem. Nah ist und schwer zu fassen der Gott, wo aber Gefahr ist, wächst das Rettende auf. Near is and difficult to grasp, the God, but where the danger threatens, grows also what saves. And if Heidegger thinks the Überwindung of metaphysics or of onto-theology as that of the eschatology, which is inseparable from it, he does so in the name of another eschatology. Several times he says of thought, here, distinct from philosophy, that is essentially eschatological. That is his word. Isn't the voice of the language. I was asking always that of the last man. Foregoing reading with you Blanchot's Le Dernier Homme. I recall, since I spoke of the voice and on Oedipus, this fragment from the Philosophenbuch. Nietzsche, under the title Oedipus, and in an absolute soliloquy, as speak with himself the last philosopher, who is also the last man.
Here we have point
He speaks with his voice. He converses with himself. Mute. What life remains for him with the phantom of his voice, and he calls on himself. He is called Oedipus. The last philosopher, that is thus is what I name myself, and for I am last man. No one speaks to me except myself, alone, and my voice comes to me like that of someone dying. With you, beloved voice, with you, last comers of a single hour. Thanks to you, I delude my solitude, and I penetrate into the lie of the multiplicity and the love. My heart lows, believing that love is dead. It does not tolerate the shudder of the most solitary of solitudes, and it obliges me to speak, as it were, to. As if I were too. For the moment he thus sends himself this message by acting as if he could still really address it to himself. This is very important. I'm going to underline that. It's my commentary. He addresses it to himself. Once more, we are talking about interpenetration, going back to oneself. This is, of course, the subject touching itself, or the subjective thing uncontained going into the container to reach the contained. Inside the container, you find the contained, and the uncontained, which is the subject, is reaching for it. This impossible destination signs the death of the last man. And in and outside him, he knows him beyond the as if, and yet still I hear you, beloved voice. He still dies someone outside him, the last man in this universe, the last sigh. Your sigh dies with me, this long alas. Breathe out on me, the last of the miserable ones, Oedipus. And of course Oedipus is here very important. He feels for his mother. That is going back to himself. It's the search for looking into himself. Reaching out and trying to catch himself. Of course, this is the attraction of the interpenetration. Then, if eschatology surprises us at the first word, at the first as at the last, always at the last but one, what are we to say? What are we to do? The response to this question is perhaps impossible, because it never lets itself be expected. For the question is that of the response and of the call promising or responding before the question. It's promising, it is responding before the question, also very important. It's a priori, preempting the question. It hasn't even been posed yet, and already we are answering the question without it even being mentioned or proposed or contextualized in words. Clarity is necessary. Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe said yesterday, yes, but there is light, and there are lights. This is a play on singular and plural, which is very interesting. Daylight, and also the madness of the day. The end is beginning. We read in the Fourier du Jour, without even referring to apocalypses of the Zoroastrian type. We know that every apocalyptic eschatology is promised in the name of light, of seeing and vision. It's the vision of the end. It's the seeing, understanding in the view of see, as I see. And of light, of a light brighter than all the lights it makes possible. John's Apocalypse, which dominates the whole of the Western Apocalyptic, is lit by the light of of Elohim. Yes, the glory of Elohim illuminates it. The kings of the earth bring their glory into it. Its gates are never closed for the day. No, there is no night there. They bring the glory, and there is no night anymore. They do not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun. Adonai Elohim illustrates them, and they rule to the ages of ages. There is light and there are lights. The lights of reason, of illumination, or of the logos that are not. For all that, some other thing. And it is in the name of an Aufklärung, remember that. That Kant, for example, undertakes to demystify the overlordly tone. In the daylight of today, we cannot have become the ears of these Lumières. We cannot and we must not. This is a law and a destiny. Forgo the Aufklärung, in other words, what imposes itself as the enigmatic desire for vigilance, for the lucid vigil, for elucidation, for critic and truth, but for a truth that at the same time keeps within itself some apocalyptic desire. This time as desire for clarity and revelation, in order to demystify, or if you prefer, to deconstruct apocalyptic discourse itself. And with it, everything that speculates on vision. The imminence of the end, theophany, parousia, the last judgment. Then each time we interactively ask ourselves where they want. Where they want, to the end of the sentence?
To come to.
Where they want to come to, and that was actually the end of the print of this.
It's a comma, to come to, and to what ends those who declare the end of this or that, of man or the subject, of consciousness, of history. Oh, yes. So it's a very long sentence.
To come to and to what's ends. Those who declare the end of this or that, of man, or the subject of consciousness, of history, of the West, or of literature, and according to the latest news of progress itself, the idea of which has never been in such bad health, to the right and the left. What effect do these noble Gentile prophets or eloquent visionaries want to pursue? In view of what immediate or adjourned benefit What do we do in saying this? To seduce or subjugate whom? Intimidate or make whom come? And I make a pause there, and I will go to Livingston. So I will continue with Paul Livingston's article to parallel read this, and it's Wittgenstein mathematics, and very important, the temporality of technique. And even in the title you can find two important clues. There is a technique, think of hand. It's actually called te in Japanese. Hand is te. Technique makes something that the hand produces, but it's verbal, it's not a noun, it is something moving, and the very movement is the understanding. This is page 10. Second paragraph, conveniently titled 2. And in the 2, I will read the second paragraph, and earlier we've been speaking of rule following. And I mentioned earlier on that idea of that rule following is some transcendental, translucent nothing. Something you can't do, you can't feel, you can't sense, you can't learn. It's just out there. Non-temporal, non-spatial counting activity without being in activity. Its immediacy is very close to the logocentric trend in Derrida, metaphysics of presence. It's immediate, comes directly like this. No waiting, no patience, and in this here, called spatial, directly. The eschatological ideas does not take any space at all. That's why they look like a black hole, I would say. Non-spatial. Non-extended. And it's exactly this res cogitans that René Descartes was here in Stockholm many years ago, parallels with res extensa. So the world out there has extension, whereas thought has no extension at all. Something that Heidegger, Wittgenstein and Derrida deconstruct, so to speak, or destruct. In the more extended development of the rule-following considerations, in the investigations, Wittgenstein considers also examples that are recognizably odd from the perspective of ordinary ways of learning and responding to teaching. For instance, a student is taught to write the sequence with the rule +2, 2, 4, 6, 8, and does so correctly up to 1,000. At this point, however, he writes 1,000, 1,004, 1,008, 1,012. Wittgenstein's point is not that we do or should ordinarily expect this kind of behavior, but rather that there are limits to what we can point to in correcting the student's misapplication. And there is no single or simple way to guarantee that a student will understand whatever we do point to in the way that we wish and normally expect him to. On the contrary, what establishes that the student has understood correctly and what constitutes understanding correctly in ordinary circumstances is not to be referred to his having any particularly momentarily experience, but rather to the complex of the circumstances that surround any such experience in the broader context of the practices in which it takes place. Let me clarify. It's a very extremely good example. It's a long investigation if the student is following a rule, and then all of a sudden it seems he did not. The question is, did he have an inner picture of what it was to follow a rule? Is there an inner voice? Is there an imagery that leads him? It's very questionable that it should be an imagery or that it should be a string of words. They would not be able to understand what it is to know a rule. Knowing the rule is still in the hands. Although the student doesn't move his hands, it is still corporal in this world. It has a very fine exception when it comes to 1,000, but that does not mean that the misconception is inside of his head. It is still in the technique, because all learning needs to take place in the outside world. It's in the outside world I learn how to hold a hand, pen I mean, need to take out the lead. I learn the alphabet letter by letter to become more and more skilled at the whole thing. So it's always a matter of skill. Compare that to the Kantian idea, where understanding doesn't take skill, it's immediate, and therefore he invents his surrogate for technique, which is rationality. A direct tendency that doesn't take time, nor space, nor technique. It just happens. So you see, pedagogical activities come into this. And I think it's quite brilliant here to bring Wittgenstein himself in, because he learned these things by the hard way. After he finished Tractatus, he went abroad. He went back to his home country, Austria, to teach young pupils mathematics, German, writing, spelling, and he completely misunderstood them. He thought understanding was a mental activity. when they didn't understand his mental explanations, he got furious and he traumatized these children. They got really badly bitten by Wittgenstein, and it was a disaster for him. He had to leave in the end. And I think it was not only one school, it was several schools. Somewhere in this process, he learned that being taught needs the voice to be toned, needs the vocal codes actually to do the process of explaining, not just detone words. Detone words that possibly can explain logic or a very shallow mathematics, but it cannot teach young children mathematics, German, writing, spelling, handwriting, calligraphy, and so forth. There you need a live voice, which is toned. And of course you also need practice. And actually, it's oddly enough, it's all down to rule following. And this is the technique that Wittgenstein is using to show that rule following is something you do. It takes time, it takes extended time. And you are helped maybe by a person, a teacher, with a toned voice. And also signs. Somebody could take your hand. And also how the instrument is made. This one is made to fit my hand. This is of extreme importance. And I think today we're still very much plagued by this idea that understanding is something inner, the inner voice of understanding. Almost like it was a subtitle happening inside my head. If you've seen these foreign movies, there's a subtitle. And I think we're starting to confuse this subtitling with true thinking. True thinking, we don't know what it is, and we can't even ask the question what it is. But there is where the taut string is. This is where you have tone. And I would say attunement or attunement. Something that makes understanding possible. I continue to in ordinary circumstances, we go back to the ordinary life. It is not to be referred to his having any particularly momentary experience. It is not in the moment. That's the whole idea. So confused when I say aha, is it happening in this instance? No, it's been going on for some time, maybe half an hour, probably much longer. The saying of aha is a different language game. Somebody listening, maybe Kalle, probably myself, I confuse that aha, this experience of relief. I got it, and you think it's momentarily. That thinking is res cogitans, with no extension in time and space. No. It has extension. It is something you almost can touch. It's tangible. it is not referred to his having any particular momentarily experience, but rather to the complex circumstances that surround any such experience in the broader context of the practices in which it takes place. All the doings, because our complex sets of doings, that in the matter of writing there's paper, there's pen, there is pressure, there's so many factors, much more complex than instantaneous understanding. Indeed, the circumstances of teaching and learning, of coming to grasp and understand in the ways that we, in fact, do, these circumstances are more than just external accompaniments to the language game of learning and understanding how a rule determines a series. Rather, they constitute this learning and understanding itself. The doing is the understanding. So they are not accessories, they're not ordinance, they're not decorations. Just like in the church we went to earlier. Just like the church we went to earlier. The inside are not decorations, they are not something added. The decorations are the faith. There's no faith without them. If you take them away, you end up with a Kantian sterile, dead idea. You have nothing. There's zero. It is in what is done, in the acts of adornment, the acts of the decorations. That took time, that took technique, and you can feel that technique directly. Taking them away, you take faith as well. You cannot have faith when they're gone. There's no chance, because the acts and the environment are part and parcel of what we do and think. This is the proper use of the word think or understand. It's so good, I just have to repeat it. But rather to the complex circumstances that surround any such experience in the broader context of the practices in which it takes place. In which it takes place, very important. It needs to be in that place, not a general place which is not situated anywhere or everywhere. Here, indeed, the circumstances of teaching and learning are coming to grasp and understand in the ways that we, in fact, do. These circumstances are more than just external accompaniments to the language games. Of learning and understanding how a rule determines a series, rather it should be. Rather, they constitute the learning, this learning and understanding itself. And as such, they also and equally constitute what it is to follow a rule itself. What it is to determine or see as determinate what follows from any particular stage. Just as with the calculative cases above, what is essential here is the idea of a technique which is fully and irreducibly part of human life, but nevertheless is as completely determinate and whose following out is as objective as anything else could be. And that is very important, because objectivity can only be reached if you follow the rule in this reality, not some other transcendental Tegmarkian reality of nowhere. Alice in Wonderland beyond rainbow, why not? We saw the rainbow yesterday. That beyondness you find. I found the austerity in the modern churches the most horrific experience in my life. And the priest or the cleric were always pointing to some Tegmarkian transcendental nowhere. And all we children, we directly grasped. He was talking about nothing, the nothingness of spirituality, God, something higher. And it doesn't get closer to the sterile, death-like, austere environment of the Kantian vision, of the eschatology, of the apocalyptic idea of a full circle where everything ended, where we don't get anywhere else, but back to where we started from the beginning. There's no advance. This should be contrasted with the spiral, that it seems like you are going back to the same point, but actually for each turn clockwise you go somewhere further. And I would say this is not unimportant. I will show it again, it's so grand. Coming from, thanks to E. McGilchrist, going back to the same point, modern religiosity or modern atheism. Doesn't make any difference. You can put Dawkins and most modern preachers in the same cell. Compare that to the spiral act of advancing, going further. Each leap in the vortex is taking you somewhere. There is a proper advance. Something is happening. Put a pause there maybe.
It's not possible to pause it.
We continue here. So I just went into what is rule following. And that rule following is not only an immediate understanding of something. The immediacy of understanding. And I would say that is often accompanied with questions. When I grew up, I think that tendency was on the way to come in. We were not encouraged largely to ask questions, but I think it's this idea, you want to have an immediate understanding and you ask questions. What, where, how do you define it, categorize it, put it into some spot, some drawer. Is it that category? Is it that category? And the idea that the immediate understanding will come from those questions. This is proven wrong here by Wittgenstein, that it is an act of doing, whatever it is. Even such a simple thing as adding 1 and 1. We do it almost instantaneously in our heads. But remember this, once upon a time when we were small, we have to learn it, and it took time. It took extensive time. And I would say never at any instance did it happen directly. And I think that is the trick. You get tricked into the idea that understanding is directly. Long after you made the troublesome strive to understand something, you get into the idea, oh, understanding is possibly directly, and I can use questions to get an understanding. How ludicrous. You can't use question to get an understanding. You can't use what, where, how, when, and then cheaply get a way of understanding something. No. The world is not constructed that way. We are in the world, and the title needs repeating: Wittgenstein, Mathematics and the Temporality of Technique. And you don't have to understand mathematics. Kant wasn't particularly understanding in mathematics, but this non-understanding how mathematics works that he already had in 1796, I think that points to that already being established by that time. He learned mathematics, it took a lot of time in his young children age. There is no coincidence that he's from Prussia. Why? Because Prussia was the first country in the world that made a law that it was obligatory for children to learn German, mathematics and writing. First one in the world. And of course then it's so much easier to fall into the trap of the idea that this happens automatically. It's something that is produced by the modern education system partly. Makes the situation worse. It could not happen in a so-called primitive culture where you have to do things by doing. Ignite a fire, you cannot go for a lighter, you need to do the things. Then you cannot lose your balance. You cannot get off the tangent. And it's also true that these more uncivilized societies or primitive societies, they show up much less of autistic behavior. Because autism is very connected to this idea of immediate understanding. They ask what, where, how, when, where, and so on and so on and so on. And of course I'm not accusing anyone of being lazy. That is not my point. My point, it is a confusion that goes down to the bottom. What is it to understand? Will I continue in the text and take some comments? Here indeed, the circumstances of teaching and learning, of coming to grasp and understand in the ways that we do, these circumstances are more than just external accompaniments to the language game. They are not decorations of learning and understanding how a rule determines a series. Rather, they constitute the learning and understanding itself. So you see how a very close connection to doing and understanding, actually not even separable. And as such, they also and equally constitute what it is to follow a rule itself, what it is to determine or see as determinant, what follows from it at any particular stage. Just as with the calculative case above, what is essential here is the idea of a technique which is fully and irreducibly part of human life. but nevertheless is a completely determinate and whose full living out is objective, and I think that is more important. Do remember the shopkeeper in the Kantian example. The shopkeeper cannot write prose, can only write mathematics, not poems. Otherwise, his mathematical calculations will not fit. They will not produce a proper result. This we learned earlier on when we read the text of Jacques Derrida, and I think this is extremely important because it shows exactly at what point Kant gets pushed in the direction of leaving the world and the daily doings. He no longer by then understands how he himself learned how to do mathematics, or for that instance, language itself, which is also a very good example. St. Augustine had learned language. Of course, it was much earlier, but language is learned earlier in your age. And he thought that it could be that a child learned by somebody giving an ostensive definition by pointing to a glass. And he neglected to understand the pointing itself takes learning. What does the pointing gesture mean? When I point, do I mean the finger? Do I mean the extension of the finger? And what on the glass do I mean? Do I mean its color, its material? Or do I generally point to something? So he confused those things because we already know language, and therefore it's a possibility to misunderstand what it is to understand language. This is similar, but on a higher level. You learn mathematics later on. And in a way you also learn science. You don't have to learn that much, but you can still succumb to the illusion of scientific knowledge to be immediate. Something often questioned by Paul Feyerabend and Thomas Kuhn, Karl Popper for that. They said that scientific progress takes time. It's not happening in an instant, and it takes practice. Often, Paul Feyerabend mentioned Hubbard and his telescope. Hubbard was one of the greatest astronomers in our history, and Hubble managed to cope with a telescope of that old age to understand the workings by his hands. Could he get a clear picture of the stars and the planets? It was a manual doing. So to say, the manual doing of the hands, the skills, cannot be separable from the knowledge of the stars. I know this sounds ludicrous, but follow through the Wittgensteinian understanding, and you learn more and more that the subject is constantly engaged in the world, actively cooperating to make a world. And I often show this, the toucher and the touchee, the subject and the object, the perceiver and what is perceived. That happens simultaneously, especially when you learn the rule. Because if Kalle is going to ask me, sitting next to me, what is 2 plus 2? My answer will be immediate. No longer do I sense it takes time. If I were 5 years old, it would take time. And I would say it still takes time, very small time. But it's still time going on. There is a temporality to it. How though can the whole series, I was speaking about the series earlier mentioned, which after all is infinite in extent, ever actually be determined objectively and fixedly simply by something that happens, as it indeed does at the particular moment, the moment of understanding or insight. That's the crucial moment. The question is pressing, especially in view of the consideration that any finite item, for instance, any finite item segment of a series, or any symbolic expression of a rule, for determining it can be variously interpreted, and so cannot be seen as fixing all by itself its total infinite extent. What does it mean? It means that the number series can go on infinitely, and we cannot tell if the pupil, the student or the child knows it, understand the doing, but we cannot ask it either. There's not an inner process that we can question. We cannot use it as a sort of an interrogative object. You ask it and it has to answer, what is understanding? What is your understanding? Tell me, give it to me. No, that is absolute nonsense. It does not work that way. Although Wittgenstein is very smart here, he gives us an understanding how we can come to the misunderstanding as well, which is very important. If we didn't have that understanding, the philosophical investigations and remarks on mathematics would not work. They are also very important pedagogical tools. Helping us to understand clearer what's happening. Or any symbolic expression of a rule for determining it can be variously interpreted. That's okay. And so cannot be seen as fixing all by itself its total infinite extent. Now you have the whole number series. Kant, of course, and others like Hegel want to fix it in an instance. In this moment, I have the whole rule in my hand, in my heart, in my brain, somewhere else. And I instantly, like that, understand it, I get it, and I can say, aha, I understood it, I got it. No, no, no. It can be at sometimes experienced that way, but it is not how it works. It takes time still. Although the time in this instance are very, very short, because we get so skilled. We do the calculations immediately. I learned the multiplication table when I was young. It took me 1 year, I think, or half a year. And I know 6 times 6 is 36, 6 times 7 is 42. I know 7 times 8 is 81. All those things, and it's immediate. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean it doesn't take time. 9 times 9 is 81. It takes time still, but especially when I learned it, it took time. So what happens is much later on, I confuse the happenings, and I think they are the same. The understanding and the calculation happen instantaneously. This becomes extremely problematic as more as you go into it. And the more you go into it, the worse it gets. And so cannot be seen at fixing all by itself, its total infinite extent, the whole number series. At Philosophical Investigations 213, an interlocutory voice responds to this kind of consideration by imagining that, where finite items are sufficient, an infinitely renewed or repeated intuition might do the trick of fixing the right interpretation across the extent of the series. And then we read, but this initial segment of a series could obviously be variously interpreted by algebraic expressions, so that you must first have chosen one such interpretation. Not at all. A doubt was possible in certain circumstances. But this is not to say that I did doubt or even could doubt. What is to be said about the psychological atmosphere of this process is connected with that. So we get a certain psychology, so far Wittgenstein admits, where it feels that the understanding, we don't reach into our own understanding, it's by hands. It's a little bit, if somebody would ask me, how do you use a stick shift automobile? Well, I can't explain anymore. I learned many years ago. It's automated. I can't teach you how to put in number 1, number 2, put in the clutch, ease up the gas. It's automated. So if you ask me, I could say it's immediate. You need to understand it, and I could bark at you, like Wittgenstein did to his pupils. You should understand this now. No. It's a repeated process of learning. It's a repeated process of doing errors. We mentioned that earlier on. We said without making errors in the stringing of the instrument or the tuning of the instrument, those errors are extremely important. No understanding or fixing of the instrument can come without those errors. And I think it's time for my colleague to say something here.
Greetings from Reuben.
The golden piece.
The golden piece, yes. So I asked myself why Derrida brings in Oedipus. And it's Nietzsche speaking with the voice of Oedipus. Then I understood Oedipus is everything is deterministic. Like it's of course Oedipus, he knows that he will die. He will marry his own mother. So everything is predetermined. And so the end is already fixed. That's of course frightens Nietzsche. But I don't know why in this context Derrida emphasizes that Oedipus speaks with his own voice. He talks with himself, maintains what life remains for him with the phantom of his voice. And he calls on himself, he's called Oedipus, the last philosopher. That is what I name myself for. I'm the last one. No one speaks to me except myself alone, and no voice comes to me like that of someone dying. With you, Lord voice. With you last breath of the memory of all human happiness, allow me still this commerce of a single hour. Thanks to you I diddled my solitude and I penetrated the lie of the multiplicity and I love you. For my heart loses believing that love is dead. It does not tolerate the shudder of the most solitary of solitude. It all allows me to speak as if I were too. As if I were too. So there is like a schizophrenic, two voices speaking. So I think that is the problem why the tone has to be neutral, otherwise you get accused of schizophrenia. I don't know if that's the reason why Derrida brings in Nietzsche's Oedipus. No. That's my question, and the other question is, okay, Hans, let's say that...
The first question was?
Why he brings in Oedipus? That is my first question. What is the point of bringing in Oedipus is my guess, right? And the second one is about mathematics. Okay, granted, it's when you count small numbers, but when it becomes really abstract, very difficult, high up. Why is it not? Is it still corporal? How can you prove that answer is still corporal and is very, very, very abstract?